Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the November 8th meeting of the Tennessee Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers to order. If I could, Ms. Bohannon, if you would do the roll call.
Fred Berry.
Present.
Anthony Harris.
Here.
Tanya Scale-Haynes.
Present.
Christopher Lee.
Present.
Scotty Porsche.
Here.
Charles Rahm.
Here.
Pam Stevens.
Here.
Mr. President, all members are here and accounted for.
Thank you, Ms. Bohannon. Next item is our agenda. If we could get a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So move. Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Harris, a second by Mr. Berry. All in favor?
Aye.
We have the minutes from our September 13th meeting that we need to approve. Give you just a minute to review those if you hadn't had that opportunity.
Make a motion we approve as presented. Second.
I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented by Mr. Harris, a second by Mr. Berry. All in favor?
Aye.
And it's time for our legal report. Mr. Bryant, our Associate General Counsel.
First complaint is complaint number 2022-032681. During the course of a routine establishment inspection, the inspector discovered that the establishment's pre-need seller registration had expired on April 30th, 2022, and had not been renewed as of August 1st, 2022. The website of the establishment indicated that the establishment offered pre-planning and pre-paying funeral arrangements. After reviewing the files from May 1st, 2022 through August 1st, 2022, the period in which the registration had expired, the investigator found no evidence to show that any pre-need contracts had been written during that time. The following day, the investigator had a conversation with the manager of the establishment who confirmed that no pre-need contracts had been written during that time. A pre-need complaint had also been opened regarding this matter. Respondent ultimately signed the consent order for the pre-need complaint and paid the assessed civil penalty. As of August 16th, 2022, respondent has re-registered their pre-need seller registration. Based on the above, we would recommend a letter of warning.
This is Fred. I'll make a motion to approve the council's recommendation of letter of warning.
Second by Stevens.
I have a motion by Mr. Berry, a second by Ms. Stevens. All in favor?
Aye. It's complaint number 2022-035681. Complainant filed a complaint alleging unprofessional conduct. Specifically, complainant stated that they received a non-payment bill for $900 from respondent. Complainant stated that they would not pay for the negligence of the respondent as they used the wrong burial site. Complainant claimed that they told respondent that they wished to use a particular cemetery, but instead, respondent had opened the burial site at a different cemetery. Complainant contends that respondent is now asking for them to pay for the incorrect opening at the first grave site. Respondent replied, refuting the facts as complainant had described them. Respondent stated that the family selected the first cemetery and that all the appropriate paperwork had been drafted consistent with that request. Respondent also stated that the complainant's family signed the bill and sent additional funding to cover the cemetery at the first cemetery. Respondent denies that they ever requested the second cemetery and did not advise of any change in their selection. Respondent further stated that various documents, including vital statistics, death certificate, newspaper announcement, funeral home information, and funeral contract, all denoted the first cemetery. Respondent stated that each document that was prepared that included the first cemetery was given to the complainant family for review. In each instance, it was approved and signed off on. Respondent stated that only during the procession did some member of the family realize the mistake and wanted the deceased to be buried at the second cemetery. Respondent then returned to the funeral home to make arrangements for the request of the new cemetery. Respondent provided documents to show where the contract initially stated the first cemetery and updated documents where the first cemetery was marked out and replaced with the new cemetery per the wishes of the family. Respondent stated the additional charge for opening and closing at the new cemetery was $1,800, and as a matter of courtesy, the respondent only asked for $900. Respondent also provided documentation for the irrevocable policy assignment, which denoted the price of just the first cemetery, and a second updated copy that included the cost of the second opening and closing. Based on the above and the documentation supplied by respondent, it appears that the change in cemetery was not due to the negligence of the respondent. Therefore, we would recommend closure.
You say they had presented a obituary draft, maybe that the family had signed with those changes?
That in itself was not in the documents that they provided, but respondent said that the newspaper releasing the draft of the obituary and multiple other documents all had that first cemetery name included, and all of those things had been seen and signed off on the family.
Barry, I'll make a recommendation to approve council's recommendation of closure.
Lee with a second.
I have a motion by Mr. Berry, a second by Mr. Lee to accept the recommendation of closure. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Next complaint is complaint number 2022-037821. On September 13th, 2022, a complaint was opened stating that the respondent had an employee listed as a funeral director / manager of the respondent establishment. The employee in question had resigned and left the organization on July 31st, 2022. Respondent replied stating that the effort to replace previous funeral director and manager began as soon as they had resigned. Respondent also provided that the same effort to remove their information from the website also began, but that 2 other employees also resigned around the same time, one of them being the head administrator who controlled all accounts with user ID and passwords. Due to this, respondent could not gain control to remove the website information. Eventually, respondent stated that the website provider provided a workaround to where the information on the website could be removed. Respondent stated there was never any intent to misrepresent to the board or public as the manager of the establishment. The response, which was dated September 28th, 2022, had been written by the newly appointed manager. Legal confirmed via core that respondent had paid for the submission of the change of manager form on September 16th, 2022. Based on the above, we would recommend a $250 civil penalty, authorized via consent order, and formal hearing if necessary.
Not remember what's the time frame for making once a licensed director leaves to make the correction.
It's 10 days.
10 days.
So here, about a month and a half.
So is the first respondent you're talking about maybe the owner or somebody, or?
My understanding is that so I guess kind of clunky in just the sense of the respondent being the establishment, the response that we received in legal was written by the newly appointed manager. I know that it takes a little while to get through our centralized complaints processes to get to us. So by the time they had provided a response, a new manager was in place. So if I'm understanding your question correctly, I think the respondent here being the establishment, but the new the new manager physically wrote the response on behalf of the respondent once he was appointed.
Clears up the question. Thank you. I'll make a motion we accept legal's recommendation. It's Harris.
Second. Barry.
I have a motion by Mr. Harris, a second by Mr. Berry to accept the board's recommendation. All in favor?
Yes.
Any opposed?
Next complaint is complaint number 2022-035741. Complainant alleged unprofessional conduct on behalf of respondent establishment. Specifically, complainant stated that they performed embalming services for the complainant and shipped the body to the respondent establishment. Complainant stated that as of November 1st, 2022, respondent has yet to pay the bill. The services performed occurred shortly after the death of the decedent, which was on November 5th of 2021. Complainant stated that when they have spoken to respondent on the phone, they contend the bill will be paid. However, complainant alleges they have yet to receive any payment for the outstanding balance of $2,886.82. Respondent did not respond to the complaint. Based on the above, we recommend a $1,500 civil penalty, $1,000 for the failure to pay the outstanding invoice, plus $500 for failing to respond to the complaint, authorized via consent order and formal hearing if necessary.
So the invoice was how
It was pretty much right at a year. Maybe a give or take a day or two, but
So with the previous history, it looks like we've had this issue before with this person, and it being a year, could we not make that penalty more to get attention, or do you feel like that's the max that we ought to go?
I think my recommendation for a max would be to bump it up to 2,000 total. That would get essentially the failure to respond to the complaint. That would bump that up to 1,000. And that would 2,000 would be my recommended max, but also with her realization that this is a recurring problem with this respondent.
I'm going to set that into a motion then to bump that up to 2,000, changing the civil penalty for failing to pay to 1,500 to 2,000. I'm sorry. Yes.
Barry, I'll second the motion.
We have a motion by Mr. Harris, a second by Mr. Berry to increase the fine to $2,000. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Next complaints are complaint numbers 2022-028561 and complaint number 2022-028581. Complainant, a funeral home licensed in Tennessee, filed a complaint against one of their former employees, alleging that the respondent had stolen funds from the funeral home on 2 separate occasions. The first occasion occurred on July 1st, 2022, when the complainant noted that $1,500 in their system had not been deposited. Respondent had made the arrangements with the family on May 26, 2022. Complainant contacted the family and determined that respondent had met with the family on June 2, 2022 to receive the payment. Complainant never received that $1,500 payment. The second incident occurred on July 5, 2022. Respondent collected a $1,500 payment, and the payment was recorded as a check payment. However, the family produced the receipt, which showed the payment had been made in cash. Complainant never received this $1,500. When complainant confronted the respondent about the funds, respondent stated that, quote, the cash was left in his pocket, and his dry cleaners had called him to let him know that, end quote. However, the $1,500 was never produced. Complainant terminated the respondent on July 6, 2022. This case was sent for an investigation. During the course of the investigation, respondent signed a document to voluntarily surrender his funeral director, embalmer, and pre-need sales agent licenses and registration. Based on the above and that surrender, we would recommend closure by accepting respondent's surrender of their funeral director and embalmer's license as a resolution for these open complaints, as well as complaint numbers 2021-02511, 2021-012801, and 2021-024-991, and those are other funeral board complaints against this respondent that are currently on litigation monitoring.
I know this type of thing has come up before since I've been on the board, and we've put a year suspension, so with some continuing ed stuff. So what happens if this person comes back wanting the license back? Is there any stipulations that this person has to go through?
Would always, in this recommendation for what the board decides, we could always attach a stipulation. However, I think on a more practical level, if this individual were to apply at a future point, our administration would know about these complaints, and in any setting in which they wanted to come forward, then the board would also know about that as well, and a license could be denied based on these issues.
Barry, I'll move that we accept council's recommendation.
Lee second.
I have a motion by Mr. Berry, a second by Mr. Lee to accept the motion or accept the recommendation of council. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Next complaint is complaint number 2022-022361. Complainant, daughter of the deceased, alleged unprofessional conduct on behalf of respondent crematory. Complainant stated that their mother had been cremated between March 27th, 2013 and March 31st, 2013. And that on Mother's Day of this year, they discovered, upon opening the box that contained the cremains, that the tag contained the information of a different decedent. Complainant alleged that when reaching out to the respondent, they told her there was nothing they could do, and that they offered to call her back later that day. Complainant contends that they never received a communication from respondent since then. Respondent replied stating that the crematory had different ownership at the time of the cremation in 2013. Respondent stated that they attempted to speak to complainant about the situation, but that complainant would not let them explain. Respondent stated that complainant was unreasonable, used profanity, and was threatening to their staff. Respondent provided audio recordings of these conversations with complainant. This case was sent for investigation. The investigator spoke first to complainant, who reiterated that when they opened the container, they discovered an unknown name on the tag. Complainant said that they researched the name and information and found and contacted the family who the ashes belonged to. Complainant stated they spoke with that decedent's daughter, who claimed that when they discovered the incorrect name, they also contacted the crematory and was told there was nothing they could do. And the other decedent's family did not follow up after that. The investigator spoke to the daughter of the other decedent, who stated she was very young when her father passed away and did not remember many details. The investigator stated that the daughter was very vague in answering questions and did not provide much further information. The investigator spoke next to a representative of the funeral home who handled the services in 2013. The representative said that she had received a call from complainant's brother explaining the situation. The representative stated that she called the manager, who explained their process to her, and that he was satisfied that the cremated ashes were correct. The manager sent the respondent an email detailing their process, which included a metal disc containing a number that does not leave the decedent. The representative stated that they passed this information along to the brother of the complainant. The investigator spoke next to complainant's brother, who stated that after he received the explanation from the representative, he turned everything over to the complainant. The investigator spoke to the manager of the respondent establishment, who stated that the crematory had cremated the deceased approximately 9 years ago. The manager stated he spoke with both complainant and complainant's brother regarding the matter. The manager stated that he was able to explain to the complainant's brother the procedures and tracking system in performing the cremations. However, while attempting to explain to complainant, the manager stated that the complainant used profanity and threatened to contact an attorney. The manager stated that since the cremation occurred over 9 years ago, and the crematory is only required to keep records for 7 years, they did not have any additional records regarding the deceased cremation. Additionally, since the crematory establishment was sold twice after 2013, there were no records kept regarding the cremation of the deceased. Finally, the investigator spoke to the owner of the crematory, who stated he had purchased the crematory in 2020. The owner stated he explained that to complainant and that he had no previous knowledge of the events that transpired prior to its purchase. The owner stated that complainant called the crematory 3 or 4 times and that each call was recorded. Legal obtained and listened to the provided recordings. During these 5 recordings, the owner speaks to complainant twice, and the manager speaks to complainant once. The other 2 calls were the reception desk transferring the calls. During these calls, the owner and manager do attempt to explain the process to complainant regarding cremation. Complainant does use considerable profanity throughout these conversations and regularly threatens with an attorney and negative media attention. Based on these calls, it appears that the "nothing we can do" statement is attributed to there being no true way to definitively tell whether the ashes are the complainant's mother's or not. Though both owner and manager attempt to offer an explanation as to why they believe, due to the metal tag system, that complainant received the correct ashes. During these calls, the owner and manager are not able to fully explain the process to complainant due to complainant ending the calls. During the first call, the owner offers to call the complainant back. It is unclear whether the respondent returned complainant's call prior to complainant calling back. There is an update on that I made a mistake by not pulling that sentence. So in the manager's affidavit and the information I pieced together from the investigation, there is a timeline kind of these events. So essentially, call 1 and call 2 occurred on May 9th, 2022 at 8 a.m., where the owner spoke with the complainant. The owner asked for additional time to pull together information since he had not owned the crematory at the time of the cremation. The funeral home who handled the arrangements for complainant's mother called at 8:45. Respondent received the receipt, release forms, and picture of the tracking disc with the remains, so that information that the owner was attempting to procure. Call 3 and 4 occurred at 9:30 on the same day. Complainant calls back, and the manager speaks with the complainant this time. Complainant ultimately hangs up the phone before the manager can complete their explanation. At 9:45 that same day, the manager speaks with complainant's brother and is able to explain the entire process. From the manager's perspective, complainant's brother is receptive to the explanation, and the brother ultimately thanks the manager for his call. I spoke to the complainant's brother as well and confirmed that that call did take place. So based on everything above, and I know that's a lot of information, so if there are any questions, please ask. We would recommend a letter of warning in the sense that, I guess to go through each point, the law under 62.5.509, you're only required to hang on to cremation records for 7 years. That is a minimum and a floor, but in this instance, they don't have those records to provide further information. It seems like the crematory did go through the funeral establishment to piece together as much as they possibly could. I believe from the manager's perspective, he contacts the brother and from his perspective has had a good conversation and has gotten to explain their process. It seems the reason he does not contact complainants after that is because he believes the situation has been resolved. He's been able to explain, and the brother seemed very receptive. Ultimately, in the timeline, the complainant calls back on June 9th, a month later, very upset that she was not contacted by the manager or the owner. So the letter of warning being that if the complainant contacted you, then that should probably be your contact person to reach out to. I understand from one side how the respondent could believe that the situation had been explained and resolved by speaking to the brother, but on the other side, I definitely understand the complainant's frustration of not being directly contacted. So again, that's a lot of information. So.
Question.
Sure.
The letter of warning, is that to the establishment or to the manager?
To the establishment.
Okay, thank you.
If the establishment records were no longer in possession of the funeral home, how were they able to match up the disc number and name?
My understanding is that, so the crematory is the one who did not have the records. The funeral establishment had some records. One of those was a picture of that metal disc and a record to link that the complainant's mother to that number.
Just a curiosity question. The second family that was involved, whose ashes did they have? Or just, if you know, I'm just wondering.
I do not know.
Okay.
What I would say there are two possible situations on the table. Is that the one we all hope happened is that the right ashes got to the right family, and
Just the wrong name.
Duplicate tags filled out
Exactly.
on both of them. That was my thinking.
exactly. And then I guess the other situation would be that potentially the cremated remains were switched, but it's limited to these two families, as it seems from our investigation.
Well, if the disc matched and they were comfortable with that, then it sounds like you just got a wrong name on the tag.
Right. That is my understanding of what is most likely from what happened.
There's no more. Sorry, if there's no more discussion, I'll make a motion to accept council's recommendation of a letter of warning.
Second by Stevens.
I have a motion by Mr. Lee, a second by Ms. Stevens to accept the recommendation. All in favor? Opposed?
Next complaint is complaint number 2022-036361. Complainant, sister of the deceased, alleged that respondent embalmed their sister without permission. Further, complainant claimed that the deceased was embalmed poorly. Respondent replied stating that when the deceased was received in their care, she was in, quote, very bad condition, with very discolored with severe jaundice, severe purge, severe edema, and weighed approximately 450 pounds or more. Respondent stated complainant originally set a time to make arrangements for Sunday, August 14th, 2022 at 9 a.m. However, complainant called at 8:28, the day of the appointment, wanting to change the time between 4 and 4:30. Respondent stated that after assessing the deceased condition, they called the family to let them know that the deceased condition was rapidly deteriorating. It was recommended that if the family wished to see the deceased, embalming needed to be done as soon as possible. Respondent stated that when asked about embalming, complainant asked her mother, who is listening in the background of the phone call, if she wanted to have the embalming done. Complainant's mother replied yes, and respondent began the process of embalming the deceased. Finally, respondent stated that several family members of the deceased, including complainant, came to see the deceased. Respondent stated that they were there for over an hour and never mentioned or complained about anything regarding the presentation or preparation of the deceased. Respondent added that in total, 16 hours passed between death and the embalming process due to the complainant and the family being unable to decide about embalming. Respondent stated they requested permission to embalm from the very first call, but did not receive it until mid-Sunday morning on August 14th. Respondent also provided legal with an embalming report and a document of notes that included the day and time of the over-the-phone embalming authorization. Based on the above, we would recommend closure.
What date they got the first call on?
I do not know for certain. I don't believe that was included in any of the information. And one thing I will say as well, the complaint was, sparse of information and details. And I spoke to respondent directly about this one, and they were able to provide very, specific records and recounting of that timeline.
Mrs. Harris, I'll make a motion we accept legal's recommendation of closure.
Barry, second.
I have a motion by Mr. Harris, a second by Mr. Berry to accept the recommendation of closure. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Next complaint is complaint number 2022-036951. Complainant, brother of the deceased, alleged unprofessional conduct on behalf of respondent establishment. Specifically, complainant stated that upon receiving the death certificate for their sister in February of this year, much of the information contained in the death certificate was incorrect. Complainant stated that they'd been trying to contact the establishment, but that the funeral director he'd been working with would no longer communicate with them and asked that all communications go through complainant's aunt. Complainant stated that the aunt is a distant relative who has little to no contact with him, that he cannot realistically obtain the death certificate through her. Respondent replied stating that they took full responsibility for the errors on the death certificate and that they are doing everything within their power to rectify the issue at an expedited rate. Respondent stated that they have mailed an amendment for the correction of the death certificate on September 2nd, 2022, and hope to receive the correction soon. Based on the above, we would recommend a $750 civil penalty to be reduced to a $250 civil penalty once the respondent has corrected the death certificate to the satisfaction of the complainant, authorized via consent order and a formal hearing if necessary.
So the death certificate has been wrong for at least 8 months, and they only filed an amendment for correction with the state in September?
Based on their response, that appears to be the situation, yes.
To your knowledge, the amended has still not been received.
I spoke to complainant late last week, and he said that he had not received the amended death certificate at that time.
Ms. Harris, I'll make the motion we accept legal's recommendation, but I'd also like to add that we follow up to make sure that that amended is received by the family if we could.
Have a motion by Mr. Harris. Is there a second?
Haynes, second.
And a second by Ms. Haynes to include the admin that the certificate is presented to the office. All in favor? Any opposed?
Next complaint is complaint number 2022-037281. Complainant, daughter of the deceased, claimed that respondent is the estranged wife of the decedent and alleged a myriad of complaints, including that respondent had refused to release the body of the deceased to them, asking for additional funds for the decedent's burial, alleged a conflict of interest for respondent being the estranged wife handling the funeral director duties of the deceased, and that the deceased had been shaved with his clothes on, evidenced by the hair on the deceased at the service. Respondent replied stating that the deceased had been her husband for 16 years and that she had only met the complainant once. Complainant stated that complainant Respondent stated that complainant went to the Veterans Hospital of Memphis to try and get the remains of the deceased, but were told that the wife, the respondent, had the rights and there wasn't anything they could do. The respondent argued essentially that as the next of kin, it was their obligation to decide what to do with the remains. Further, respondent stated that she and the aunt of the complainant went to the bank to acquire a cashier's check to pay for the services. However, the check did not cover the entirety of the cost. Thus, additional funds were required. Respondent attached photographs of the deceased at the service, and there appeared to be no hair on the clothes of the decedent. Further, respondent attached photographs to show that complainant had been pleased with the service, stating, quote, "My dad looked great. The service was beautiful, Mama," the first name of the complainant. "Thank you for all you've done," end quote. The complaint seems to primarily be a family dispute, and complainant has not provided any evidence to show the violation of any funeral board statutes or rules. Complainant did not provide any evidence to show that respondent was no longer legally married to the decedent, or to show that there was a power of attorney that had been established for the complainant. Therefore, based on the above, we would recommend closure.
Move for approval.
Please second.
I have a motion by Ms. Stevens, a second by Mr. Lee to accept the board's recommendation. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
It's complaint number 2022038151. Respondent, a licensed funeral director and embalmer, is also the manager of 3 separate Tennessee funeral establishments. Respondent's funeral director and embalmer's licenses expired on June 30th, 2022, and was reinstated on July 22nd, 2022. During that period, the respondent acted in the capacity of a licensed funeral director and establishment manager for 5 decedents in total. Respondent replied stating that they attempted to renew their funeral director and embalmer's licenses in April when their pre-need sales agent registration was due to ensure that it would not be late. Respondent admits that they failed to confirm that the funeral director and embalmer's license renewals had been accepted because they assumed they had gone through along with the pre-need sales agent registration. Respondent stated that on July 22nd, 2022, they were notified by email that their licenses had lapsed by 21 days. Respondent offered an apology, stating that they did not intentionally fail to renew their licenses. Based on the above, we would recommend a letter of warning, though also, I guess, with the caveat and just heads up of that the next several complaints are tied to this one and that there are recommended civil penalties for the establishment.
In the past, has this been the norm for letter of warnings if someone has not renewed their license within 21 days, or is it just different situations each time?
I would say it's definitely been consistent in the sense of this particular director doesn't have any disciplinary history. This doesn't appear to be a pattern. Relatively speaking, I guess we've seen worse than 3 weeks. We'll put it that way. Also with the knowledge that they were, that they acted in a capacity that the license would require for 5 different occasions. All of that being considered, I think kind of taken in the totality of the situations where the establishments are, or we're recommending to give civil penalties to the establishments, that letter of warning is generally consistent with kind of all of the facts and circumstances at play. Though again, if the board is more inclined to assess a civil penalty, then that would also be justifiable.
My question is more of history from other funeral directors that have done this. Is that pretty much so, a letter of warning that distant?
I would say, I think of the, I guess also with the caveat that I've been on this board about a year. With the one we had a couple of meetings ago, that was a much higher assessment, though that was due to kind of a more repeated history. I will say that I know some of the board members have been kind of involved longer than I have, so I might defer to them on what has been done previously before my tenure here. Because I know kind of with this situation, it's popped up a few times since I've been here, but not a lot.
Stevens, I think as a benchmark, to answer your question, I think there has been a small civil penalty applied in this particular circumstance. The members of the board can, that's the best of my recollection.
I agree.
That's based on history too. I mean, if this is a continuing
Yes.
I would just
problem.
like for this board to be consistent.
Absolutely.
That's my point.
Definitely.
I guess I'm a little confused with, and we can't bump ahead, but we've got some civil penalties in the other issues, and we're saying a letter of warning here. Is there maybe a reason for your thinking there?
So basically, in this situation, we have complaint 11 is this individual funeral director who is a funeral director and manager for these establishments. The establishments, specifically 12, complaint number 12 and 15, are two of the establishments that this individual is a manager for. So essentially, the civil penalties are being assessed against the establishments for having, for this 3-week period, an unlicensed person as manager. In this instances, because these were done as individual inspections, it kind of came back with additional open complaints. So I think the cleanest way to maybe tackle these groupings of complaints would be for 11 to be ultimately what the board decides to do for this instance in regards to this funeral director. And then the additional complaints against them attached to those establishments can be closed because this one tackles everything. So I guess the short version to your question is that the establishments have civil penalties attached to them because they had an unlicensed person as their manager for 3 weeks. And that, given the lack of disciplinary history and that this hasn't been an issue prior, we recommended a letter of warning for the funeral director, but also with the understanding that, as I've said before, typically I will recommend something maybe a little lower, and then the board can increase it if they wish, due to your knowledge in the field that I don't have.
Well, it's my opinion that we need to attack each one individually. And as I'd indicated, the benchmark for something of this nature, whether it was 3 weeks or 3 months, it's still a failure. Matter of how much this board wants to do anything.
I think I agree with you. In the past, we have done a minor fine, if I remember right, on some of the others.
While they're thinking, I've just got a question. I'm guessing that 2 of these locations maybe are satellite locations. Can you be a licensed manager on record for more than one location? That's more of a question for me. I'd always heard different about that. Does that make sense? Can you be the manager on the license through the state for more than one full-time location?
My understanding is that there is nothing in the rules or statutes that prevent that. I do know, again, that that's something of, I'm not certain how that's been, I guess, more tackled on the administrative side, but there's nothing to my knowledge that will prevent them.
Yes, sir.
Administratively, what we've done in the past is, if there's a licensed facility that is only open for visitation or for funeral services, or they're meeting a family to write a pre-need contract, then we have accepted an application for the same person, same funeral director, to be the manager of that location, who is already a manager of another location. But if they have a administrative assistant or someone there that keeps office hours at any time, we have not. That's it's been the guidance the general guidance we got from a board several years ago, and we haven't changed from that. The most of this gentleman here whose license is expired is serving as the manager of the most number of facilities of anyone in the state. He's serving as a manager of three facilities, and he affirms to us and attests to us that there's one that's open on a regular basis. The other two, even though a satellite location is not defined in the law, you and I understand, and the other board members understand what we're talking about. So he's the manager of one facility and additional 2 satellite facilities.
That's what I was wondering. I'd heard over the years, and I just thought that if it was up and running full time, that you had to have a separate license, I guess, to manage that. But that answers my question.
Obviously, if the board has different guidance, we'd be receptive to knowing that and administratively processing it as the current board would want us to. But we have been consistent in what I just explained over a number of years and doing it that way.
Back to our complaint. Anyone on the board have a recommendation or a motion?
I'd like to make a motion, this is Pam Stevens, that on this particular case, 2022-03-8151, that we add a $250 penalty.
Harris, I'll second.
I have a motion by Ms. Stevens, a second by Mr. Harris to do away with the letter of warning, but to establish a $250 civil penalty. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Next complaints are complaint numbers 2022-038141, 2022-038421, and 2022-038431. And again, the same situation here where the establishment is one of the locations for which that individual in the previous complaint was a manager. And let me check. So we had recommended prior a $250 civil penalty for the establishment based on the fact of having an unlicensed individual as the manager, and foreclosure on the funeral director and embalmers licenses, with, I guess, the intent that complaint number 11 would cover those issues, but as Mr. Rahm has, suggested, that would prefer to tackle these individually. So one thing I will say is that there was, this may matter to the board and it may not, there was no evidence that the respondents embalmed any decedents during that period. The license was still expired for 3 weeks, though where on the funeral director's license there is evidence of them having conducted services and funeral director activity, there was no evidence of embalming.
So the establishment license was not expired, just the manager's license, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Because he was a manager, that's the reason you went towards the funeral establishment for your fine?
Correct. Under the law, the establishment needs to have a licensed individual designated as the manager, and for 3 weeks they did not.
Consistency there. I'm trying to remember if consistently, if it's been $250 for the director and $250 for the establishment, and I cannot. I think it has. I'd make the recommendation that we approve council's recommendation for the establishment of a $250 civil penalty.
Harris, I'll second.
I have a motion by Mr. Berry, a second by Mr. Harris to accept legal's recommendation. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
We need to include in that, Mr. Ron, about the funeral director and embalmer recommendation for closure in that same complaint.
Well, we accepted legal's recommendation.
Recommendation. Okay, I heard the penalty. I didn't hear the other one. I apologize.
That's good.
Numbers 2022-038-481, 2022-038-491, and 2022-038-511 are, again, the same situation here with a separate establishment. So for consistency's sake, we recommended $250 against the establishment, and closure for these with complaint 11 covering the violation for the individual.
Mrs. Berry, I'd make the same recommendation as the previous for the civil penalty and closure of the funeral director and embalmer.
Harris, I'll second.
I have a motion by Mr. Berry, a second by Mr. Harris to accept the recommendations of council. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
And the final one is a represent from the September board meeting, complaint number 2022-028-971. Complainant, daughter of the deceased, filed a complaint against respondent alleging unprofessional conduct. Complainant provided initial context stating that she had a half-sister who is also a daughter of the deceased, who, as complainant describes, quote, was a daughter that her dad had in secret, end quote. First, complainant claimed that on the day of her father's service, respondent hugged her and gave her a program, but refused to give complainant's half-sister a program. The complainant says after she said something to respondent ultimately provided the program to the sister. Next, complainant alleged that during the deceased processional, respondent was at the front of the chapel at the decedent's casket when complainant and her half-sister walked up. Complainant alleged that respondent gave her a tissue and began rubbing her back and arm. Complainant states that they asked respondent to stop. The respondent continued to make physical contact with complainant despite her objections. Finally, complainant stated specifically, quote, I do not know when nor how, but I do know that respondent went into the office where my half-sister was alone and asked her, so how are you related to them? Referring to the family of the deceased. Complainant further detailed the conversation between her half-sister and respondent as she understood it to have happened, alleging that respondent asked the half-sister, quote, why she was here, end quote, and that respondent, quote, couldn't believe she came, end quote. Complainant stated when she returned, her half-sister was visibly upset and later relayed the conversation she had with respondent to complainant. Complainant said that her half-sister confided in her that she had felt welcomed by the family regarding her relationship with the deceased, but that the respondent made her feel as if she didn't belong there. Respondent replied stating that though she was not initially scheduled to work the service in question due to a past familiarity with complainant, respondent wanted to show respect to complainant and the family since respondent had known her for many years, since complainant and respondent's daughter had grown up together. Regarding the first allegation, respondent said that she personally did not line up the family, did not know who was in the family other than complainant. Respondent added that though she had known complainant's half-sister for over 30 years, she never knew and was not aware at the time of the service that she was the decedent's daughter and not aware that she had come with complainant. Respondent did not address complainant's second allegation of unprofessional conduct. Finally, respondent provided their sequence of events regarding complainant's third allegation. Respondent stated that she walked by the office and noticed the half-sister in the room. Respondent stated she checked on the half-sister to confirm that she didn't need anything, and then inquired as to the half-sister's relation to the deceased, such as asking specifically, quote, how are you related to them, end quote. Respondent contends that the half-sister said that she had told respondent that she was the deceased daughter several years ago. The respondent stated in her reply that she did not recall ever being told about their relation. Respondent stated that complainant's information regarding the conversation with the half-sister was untrue. Respondent concluded saying that her only intent was to provide service to her in a caring manner since she had known complainant for so long, and again reiterated that she was not aware that complainant's half-sister was the daughter of the deceased. On that previous one, we recommended a letter of warning, and the board said that they would like further information regarding the second allegation of unprofessional conduct. Legal spoke with respondent regarding the allegations, specifically the second allegation of unprofessional conduct. Respondent stated that she had known the complainant since she was in elementary school with her daughter. Respondent stated that she wasn't originally scheduled to work that day, but willingly stayed when she found out it was the complainant's father to offer additional support. Respondent said she was surprised by the complaint because she was trying to be there for the complainant. Respondent said although she knew the half-sister, she didn't realize the relationship between her and complainant. According to respondent, all respondent knew is that the deceased was complainant's father and that complainant was in charge of the arrangements. Regarding the second allegation, respondent said that she walked up with complainant to the casket because she knew that complainant had lost both parents. Respondent stated that as a mother herself, and due to the previous relationship with complainant, she wanted to offer her support. Respondent stated that complainant said, "I'm good," when respondent reached out. Respondent stated that she may have gone too far by trying to offer support to complainant, but that she had been a funeral director for a long time and had had several people reach out and thank her for her extra help and support. Respondent communicated to legal that she wanted to offer that same support to complainant, who she has known since complainant's childhood. Respondent stated finally that as a mother and a professional who had been there for a lot of people, she just wanted to be there for complainant as well. Based on the above, we would recommend a letter of warning, but what I will say is that with our previous discussions of a lot of this comes down to intent of what that both parties agree that conversation between the half-sister and the respondent happened. We don't know exactly what was in the respondent's head when they said whatever they said or what the intent was behind that. I think the board has enough here to, if they say that, that happens as an accident, she should be more aware, but I think potentially the board can close it. I think also the board has enough here for a letter of warning, and I think even if the board thinks that kind of the allegations regarding the unwanted physical contact are severe enough, I think the board could also have leeway to do a $250 civil penalty as well.
Based upon the response of the respondent, I personally think I'm going to make a motion that we close.
I agree with Mr. Berry. Second that motion on closure.
I have a motion by Mr. Berry, a second by Mr. Lee, to accept the recommendation. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
That's for closure. Closure.
For closure. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Next item on our agenda is our Executive Director's report. Mr. Gribble.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, board members. First, we have our financial data for fiscal year 21 through 22. This fiscal year data would begin on July 1, 2021 and run through June 30th, 2022. First page is what we call a financial recap. It's based on financial data that is made available to the board's executive director by the Assistant Commissioner's Office for Regulatory Board of the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance on October 12, 2022 for use in the compilation of this report. The beginning balance for July 1, 2021 was $1,130,586. The net revenue or our earnings for July 1, 2021 through June 30, 2022 was $802,378, making total funds available in the amount of $1,932,964. The expenditures at the board for July 1, 2021 through June 30, 2022 was $600,869, which leaves a reserve balance on July 1, 2022 of $1,332,095. And even though it's a zero expense, we still keep a line there for a core expense because from the previous year, and I would call your attention to the second page and taking the liberty to highlight some things in yellow, which might make it a little bit easier for you to find. But if you look under next to the last column down at the very bottom for fiscal year, this goes back to 2021, you see that we had a reserve balance of $1,201,191, but then the core expense was $70,605. So that reduced the reserve balance to $1,130,586. And then if you look up about 4 lines, it's not highlighted for the fiscal year 2021, but is highlighted for fiscal year 21-22. You can see we had a deficit for that particular year for $68,183. But actually, when you add the $68,000 and the $70,000, then we're up to $138,000. Which, if you go back to fiscal year 18 and 19, which was $149,140, you can see it kind of tracks the same pattern. Sometimes the fiscal department will change the formatting or change the way that they specifically track expenses, and that's what I've attempted to point out here, to see that expenses really haven't changed all that much. But every other year we have and it's because the largest number of licenses expire on June the 30th of the even numbered years. So every other year, one year we'll have a reserve for that particular year that typically runs anywhere from $180,000 to $200,000. And then the next year we'll have a deficit that will run anywhere from $125,000 to $150,000. If we have 2 consecutive years where we have deficits, then we have to appear before government ops up in the General Assembly. Now that hasn't happened in many, many years, so we haven't had to appear. And they understand that every other year we have a deficit, but as long as we have a reserve balance and we don't have 2 consecutive years, then that's not required. I guess the bottom line is the board's in good shape. We've got a reserve balance on July 1st, 2022 of $1,332,095. Now it becomes a matter of what reserve balance does the board need, or what's sufficient, or what's too much, or where are we there? Well, you can see our expenditures for this past fiscal year was basically $600,000. So we've got a little bit over 2 times the expenses, the normal expenses for the board in reserve, which, in my understanding, when the controller's office has come in and done audits previously, that's the general, what they look at. If you've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 times what your expenses are, then it's okay. If the expenses get too much, then the controller's office will write a finding, and some boards have had that to happen, where the reserves are too much. So the good news is, we being the board, has money. Don't want it to be too much. So at some point, if that continues to grow, then the board may want to look at reducing some kind of fee or something like that, which this board has done twice previously, and probably twice in the last, I don't know, Mr. Rom, you're probably the longest serving member. I think you might have been part of the board each time. If not, it was just done previously to your appointment. But probably in the last 8 to 10 years, the board reduced fees twice. Once was the board determined to reduce the individual funeral director and embalmer's license. The renewals used to be $275. The board reduced those to $235 for each one of them, which would save someone who's licensed as a funeral director and embalmer $80 every 2 years. And then more recent, the board reduced the initial registration fees for an apprentice funeral director, an apprentice embalmer, and a student. Those were at $75 at one time, and reduced those to $50. The thinking being help the people that are trying to get into the profession. So my recommendation would be go through this year, because I know we're going to have some more core expenses, or it's my understanding that we're going to have some, and I think everybody knows what core is, but in case anybody's wondering, that's the licensing system we use. All regulatory boards use it, and when there has to be updates or improvements or revisions, then each board, when it's a major contract, then each board gets assessed a certain amount depending on the number of licensees, and it's a pro rata share of our expenses to the whole program. But you can. I'm not going to take time unless you want to. If you want to, I'll be glad to go over each one of these line items. But I wanted to make sure that you had them so you could see them. And if you've got any questions, I'll be glad to answer those. Just to clear up something, if you go back to fiscal year 18 and 19, and about the middle of the page where it says grand total for the expenses, that appears, well, it indicates it is $345,713. But at that time, then cost backs were added separately. So there were $212,435 in cost back. So that would make the total $558,148. Now for the years beginning with fiscal year 19 and going forward, those other 3 years already have those cost backs included there. And that's why I highlighted the grand total up there of $600,869 instead of highlighting it down where it says total expenditures. Because for the last 3 fiscal years, those cost backs, those being for administration, investigation, legal, field enforcement, customer service center, and centralized complaints, are all included in that grand total already. And the changes I mentioned format the expenditures.
Anyone have any general questions for Mr. Gribble in regards to this? I think if you've got detailed questions, he'll, as he indicated, be happy to sit down with you and discuss those. Mr. Gribble, do we need this as a form of a motion to approve, or?
I think just in the director's report in general, it's part of the director's report. But I know it's a significant part of this because we don't do this detailed, especially each meeting. So, but I think as long as there's no questions, if you have a motion at the end for the director's report, that would be included in with that.
One question I have is, for burial services, how does it has its separate expenses and revenue, a totally separate budget?
Totally separate, which would be something similar to this, but it's totally separate and apart from that. And that's for the cemeteries, pre-need sellers, and pre-need sales agents. And that, as you know, there's not a board for that. That's part of administration. But it has a complete separate, everything you see on this, there would be one just like it, with the figures being different, but they'd be one formatted in the same way for burial services.
You reviewed that at the Cemetery Association meeting. I believe you went over some of that. But what do you recall off the top of your head, like how's the reserve running there? Do you recall?
I will tell you, I don't try to remember numbers anymore. The reserve is fishing and somewhere in line
with them
to what this one is, but I can't remember the exact
I wouldn't
amount.
expect you to remember.
And I don't. I'm hesitant to. I've got the information upstairs.
No worries. But it's in line. It's kind of the same basis that twice the expenses.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's in the reserve may not hardly be twice the expenses for that. I'm not sure. I will mention two things that I think is important for you to know about this. And this is my personal opinion, has nothing to do with the figures and doesn't change anything. But one is, if you look on the cost backs there and you see investigation, there are times that we use the department has a very good investigative division that's headed by Richard Hatfield. And there are times that legal needs to use them, like especially if they're needing to do immediate service process on someone, or maybe they need to verify if they're, if an establishment's open and operating. For various reasons, legal will use them. But of course, this board, I feel like we're fortunate that we have our own investigator who is a funeral director, embalmer, and a certified crematory operator, and has experience and having a cemetery before, and also in pre-need sales. So that's why you see the investigation costs as low as they are. I mean, if we were needing to use the investigative division of the department, then you would see a much, much higher amount there. So our investigator is his salaries up, reflected up above in the top up there at the above for salaries. The other thing I want to point out is to see how the legal has decreased over the past 4 years. But I'm very proud of the relationship that Mr. Bryant and I have with each other and the services that he provides to the board. But that, and that can have a lot of things as to what causes that to fluctuate. But it's decreased, and you'll see as well how administration costs have decreased. So there's a general focus to the government to provide as many services where internal customer or external customer. That doesn't change any of the figures. That's just information.
So, like if you're having a hearing, that's going to increase the legal fees.
But yes.
Okay.
Of a hearing, or if there are cases where maybe very complex or something like that require
More time.
more time than normal from the attorney. Next is a legislative update. We wanted to put this back on the agenda because it's getting near time for the legislative session to come back. Our office has not been contacted by either the Tennessee State Funeral Director and Morticians Association or the Tennessee Funeral Director Association regarding their intent to pursue new legislation during the upcoming legislative session. We extend an invitation to both associations and any other interested parties that would like to meet with their staff and legal counsel prior to the introduction of legislation affecting the Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers. Next is the licensee report. It's a report of licenses that have been administratively approved by the Executive Director pursuant to Board authority, and these cover the period of September 12, 2022 through November 4, 2022. Next is the closed establishment report. One establishment is reported closing: Superior Funeral Home, Knight Arnold Chapel, 5279 Arnold Road in Memphis, Tennessee. Action report. It's a report of consent orders that have been administratively accepted or approved by the board. Been administratively accepted and approved by the Executive Director pursuant to the board authority as reported on the August and September 2022 Regulatory Board Disciplinary Action Reports. And you'll see the licensees or unlicensed establishments in one particular case, but you see the respondents and their locations of violations and the civil penalties involved there. And then the complaint report as of November 3, 2022, we had a total of 35 complaints. 20 of those referred to a funeral director and or embalmer, and 15 to an establishment. Members, that concludes my report, but I'll be glad to answer any questions about any of that information that you might want to know more about.
Any questions for Mr. Gribble in regards to the Executive Director's report?
Do we accept the report, Barry?
A second, Harris.
I have a motion by Mr. Berry, a second by Mr. Harris to approve the Executive Director's report. All in favor?
Aye.
Next item is our application for a licensure.
President, you have no individuals in one establishment to appear before the board today. The proposed establishment is Bates Love Funeral and Cremation. Kenley Lewis Bates is to be the manager, to be located at 530 Highway 64 East, Suite 6 in Waynesboro, Tennessee, 38485-3050. It's a new establishment. The ownership is a LLC, limited liability company, being Bates-Love Funeral and Cremation LLC, which is at 527 Highway 64 West in Waynesboro. And representatives from that proposed establishment are present today. And if all three of you are whomever's going to be the spokesperson stand at the podium, and somebody else can sit at the table, speak loudly so that you can be heard.
Well, we appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. We have a history of funeral service in our family, and we're just excited for an opportunity to stand on our own 2 feet and continue to serve the community in which we live. I'm Kenley Bates.
Okay.
And Lee, my name's Pam Stevens. How long have you been a funeral director?
2015, got my license.
Okay.
I graduated high school on a Friday night and started working the funeral home Monday morning. So almost 8 years.
Okay. Who are your representatives with you?
This is David A. Thomas, uncle.
Okay, welcome.
Looking over the material you've presented, do you all have a place worked out to conduct your services, or?
We have talked to some of the local churches and their building.
Also noticing in one of the pictures, is it just one big open room in your office where you're going to conduct everything? I didn't see a division of offices. Is it just one big open arrangement room and everybody that enters your business would come into that exact same room, or?
That is correct. In the restroom, that is correct. It's a storage room.
Doing arrangements with a family and somebody from the public walks in, how do you anticipate to handle that?
What I thought we would do is maybe put a sign on the door that we were currently with the family for assistance to call the number, and that way they wouldn't just be walking into the middle of a room where we had a family sitting.
You eventually have plans to have something other than just a one-room business?
Yes, sir. We're in the process of that. We're trying to get this started to go ahead and start doing some business, and then we'll do a change of location. On the LLC, that other address is actually the building we hope to move to one day. We are in the process of getting approval from the fire marshal for our architectural drawings.
How long do you anticipate that being?
Well, it's hard to say with it going through the fire marshal's office. We're hoping to have it resubmitted to them within 2 to 3 weeks from now. If we've met all their requirements at that point, we would hope approval would come shortly thereafter, and construction should take about 2 to 3 months, is what our general contractor tells us.
Question. So, do we have an inspector that goes by to look at the facility before the, right?
Yes, there should be a copy of the inspection report there. If there's not, we've made a mistake in not including it.
They're the ones who check all the items off the price list, things like that. The inspector does?
Yes.
Okay. I assume you meet the minimal requirements of the facility, but it is concerning that it's just one room. It seems like if you're offering, your goal is to offer the best service possible, that one room could be a challenge. And I'm sure you're hoping to grow your business and do a lot of business. That could quickly become an issue of being able to serve your clients well. I guess that's my largest concern over reviewing the information.
That inspection report is near the beginning. I think it starts on page 4 of the PDF. inspection was done.
2 other questions. You are selling pre-need, is that correct?
That is correct. Upon approval, and we've already registered for our initial pre-need seller registration.
Your statement of funeral goods and services, I see grave marker there. You're going to be selling markers on the side as well, or?
No, sir, that should be like a temporary grave marker.
Okay.
Going to have merchandise at this location? Like, okay.
My geography is not the greatest, but how far is Josh Adair in Humboldt? I mean, not Humboldt. Where is he? Hohenwald to Waynesboro.
Miles.
Okay. I personally know Josh, and he does great work. Well, I think you've heard from most of us. We do have a concern about the one room. Funeral service, as you well know, is very private and personal time for families. And it is a way for you to get started, but it is a concern.
I'm not sure if that would be an option, but it could be something that we could get like a portable divider and maybe divide the room in half. I mean, ultimately it's still going to be one room, but it would provide some exclusion just from walking in the door.
Just encourage you to try to do something as quickly as possible on that. It appears you do meet the minimal requirements, but we certainly, I know you don't want, and we don't want to see complaints coming from consumers down the road, and that has to do with the ability to professionally meet with your clientele. So.
I have a reservation of approving the way it's presented. Is there a way that we could say if you build a wall for a private arrangement room, then represent to us? That's just my opinion. I'll listen to others' thoughts.
Ask legal, but I don't know that there's anything in a rule or statute wise that's going to allow us to require that. But great question.
Yeah. I think they'll take to heart our recommendation with what we've seen in the past and to make it better for you guys. But it's a little more personal, but good start. I wouldn't want to hold you up for another month or anything like that. But I guess just words of experience and wisdom. So.
And sort of had a question, Mr. Berry, but the rules, my answer is probably not going to be very helpful, but the rules give the board a lot of flexibility and leeway for determinations. So there's nothing that says it can't be one room or anything like that. It's essentially just up to the board to determine that.
So if we did do something like that, I mean, we need to be consistent down the road. And I'm trying to think back on similar situations. I don't know in my tenure that we've had a single room situation. It seems like most of the time there is a
All had
separated office. So that poses a good question.
Is it a financial reason for not separating the room, or is that a building code a situation where they're not allowing you to do that?
So we have not asked him to do that because financially we're only going to be in this building. We're hoping for 3 months maximum. Now I understand there's a lot that plays into that. But so I guess mostly financially, I'm not sure if there would be any code that would violate that. I have not had that conversation.
Okay.
Other than a wall, he's looking at a entire, I guess, new facility within 3 months.
Explain a little bit about your prospects of a new facility.
We have our building purchased, and we already have the architectural drawings in the process of being completed. They've been submitted to the fire marshal once. They came back with some corrections. The architect is working on those and ready to resubmit, hopefully in the next 2 weeks for approval. Provided we receive that approval, construction would begin immediately.
Sorry, I remember you stating that earlier about that. I guess I had a disconnect there on. I was thinking it was to that facility, but you're talking about a totally separate facility.
Correct.
Is that a freestanding facility? Is it a former church or anything of that nature? Or?
Actually, it used to be a grocery store.
Okay.
Right now it's
Square foot.
10,500.
You plan on utilizing all 10,000?
We do to some extent. 7,500 is what we're looking to remodel for visitation, funeral, meeting with family and such, and a crematory in the other end as well as a garage.
How many calls do you anticipate doing between now, say you get your license, and when you move?
Well, we're hoping to do anywhere from 1 to 5 a month. We have no way of knowing.
I guess the reason for my question is, I mean, if it's not going to be that many calls, and I can't see that it would be on a new establishment, why not just wait till you get into your new establishment and come before the board at that point?
Because we have no way of knowing how long that will be for certain. And I have not been working full-time since May. And so we were trying just to get something started. The funeral home there in town has sold out. And so the community, that's my opinion.
Well, I'm just going to be honest. I'm not a big fan of the Samsonite chairs around the table in a one shotgun kind of office. I think families deserve better than that.
I'll step out on the limb here and y'all can vote me down, but I'm going to make a motion that this not be approved until they come back with at least a private room for arrangements in this facility, or wait until they get the new facility ready, just out of respect for families. I don't feel this setting gives the families the proper privacy that they do deserve.
I have a motion by Mr. Harris.
Second, Haynes.
I have a second by Ms. Haynes. All in
President,
favor?
can I ask something?
Yes, sir.
For administrative purposes and the way we track applications and complaints, I don't know if the board would be agreeable to this or not. Are you agreeable to table it? Or help me understand administratively how you want us to handle it. You want it tabled?
It could be subject to
Can we allow
subject to showing proof that.
Yeah, instead of them, if we're going to go that route, instead of them having to wait till the next board meeting, if you guys feel uncomfortable, can we at least allow Mr. Gribble or legal or whoever that if he's comfortable with what they do to approve it without them having to come back a month later?
I mean, I'm okay with that if everybody else is. I would just, me personally, I feel like there ought to be a private arrangement room, and if we all agree to let them present that to you, that's been taken care of, I'm okay with that.
Let me be clear. That's not what I was asking. I just
Okay.
wanted to be clear administratively how you wanted us to handle it. We have the option to take, if you table it, then we'll put an action step on it for them to come back to the next board meeting or whatever the board determines about that. The other option would be, to obviously approve it, and the third option would be to deny it. And I just wanted to be clear so we would know how to, and I should have waited till I'm sorry for interrupting, I should have waited till your motion was voted, passed, or failed before I asked that question. But it was a question I had, is administratively, if your motion passes, is administrative intent to just put the application on hold? The board's not denying the application, correct?
Right. I feel like it ought to be on hold until a better setting is in place. Absolutely. So I'll change my motion that we table this application.
Ms. Haynes, are you in agreement with that?
Yes, I'll second.
I have a motion by Mr. Harris, a second by Ms. Haynes to table this particular application, give them some time to do some things that need to be done. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Could I ask one question for clarification purposes? To divide that room is not something we're opposed to, but what would the board like to see as far as divisions? Is something that, like I talked about, a temporary divider wall being put up there, would that be sufficient, or are we talking about a freestanding, totally separate room?
Personally, in my opinion, I think as long as you have some type of divider type thing, so if someone does walk in the door, they're not just walking right up on whoever's working with a family. That way, whoever's answering the phone is not right there with the family, and any other staff is just not right. That is my opinion. Others on the board?
I totally agree with that. I just feel like there needs to be a separation from
I'm
that
not saying
family
you
to the
got to
public.
come in and put up joists and all that kind of stuff. If
Right.
you can just get something to temporarily possible factor, something to help hide.
You can notify the office, and then the inspector will come back out and do another inspection and make photographs. Then, when you get to that point that you think that.
Next item is our new business.
Delegate grant to the annual meeting of the International Conference of Funeral Service Examining Boards. It's the conference is a short title for the International Conference of Funeral Service Examining Board. So the conference makes available to every board who is a member of their organization one grant. Did last year, beginning last year, and is extending that again for 2023. This is for a board meeting. Well, not a board meeting, but for a annual meeting of the conference that occurs on March 1st through the 2nd, 2023 in Chandler, Arizona, which is close to Phoenix, Arizona. Mr. Berry, the board approved him last year to go, selected him and approved him. And, of course, I need to put in somewhere this caveat. Of course, this is subject to us applying to administration and getting administration's approval as well for this to occur. But today, in order to move that process forward, if the board wanted to select one of your members to apply as a delegate grant, then it's time to do that for the conference because there's a deadline on doing that. Mr. Berry might explain a little bit about what happened last year and his perspective on attending last year, if that's okay, Mr. President, for the board to know more about it.
It's an excellent opportunity. I'd encourage anybody that had interest to participate. It's a great learning opportunity. You meet folks from all across the country, learn more about the conference and how the national board exam is given and the challenges with that. Right now, the international conference is going through a process of about every 5 years. They update the tested questions, come up with the new pass rate, and so it's very interesting and great learning process. I attended a seminar that also talked about that a lot of board members from across the country attended, that you learn maybe how to more effectively, efficiently run board meetings and ethics involved, things like that. That was a good meeting that I attended during that. They have several meetings going on throughout you have joint meetings, and then you'll have individual or subject related meetings. So encourage anybody that has interest to take the opportunity.
Typically, the only cost incurred to the board is $200. I think it was $200 to attend that board member training that Mr. Berry referred to, and he paid for it himself last year, and we were able to get it reimbursed. Of course, that's subject to approval of administration as well, but that's typically the only expense to the board is the board member training.
You had mentioned before, that's also can be granted to staff of the. Is there any interest from the staff on going?
we haven't talked about it because we talked about another issue the other day, and Miss Bohannon told me, said if it's in Las Vegas, I'd like to go. If it's not, I don't have a lot of interest, so I don't know if that would hold true. This is near Las Vegas, but it's not in Las Vegas. That was just small talk that we were making about another event that was in a totally different location. But anyway, it is open to board members or staff. But since it's something new and you know, we wanted the board members. Obviously, if no board members interested in it, then we'll ask for maybe a different approval by the board. But I think it's something that I'll be going anyway because I'm a member of that board and was elected at the last year. I was elected for 3 years, so of course I have to be in this position in order to serve on that board. But I'm a member of that board, so I'll be going anyway. And it's board members have any interest. That's your service to the board opportunities.
That being said, is there a board member that has some interest?
What kind of time frame are we looking at? I mean, if somebody wants to go, I'm all for that.
March the 1st to the 2nd.
No, I'm not talking about time frame to making that decision. I just kind of looked. I don't know.
I mean,
if anybody wants to go, I'm behind you 100%.
I'm interested, but I would
to
have to
away.
check with my company before I could say yes. But after hearing Fred's experience, I would definitely have interest, but I have to check other avenues first.
I would just recommend that those that are interested to, as quickly as you can, get with Mr. Gribble, and that way he can have some idea as to if there is a board member wanting to go and can go. If not, then we can move on to other persons. Make that decision today.
Just as long as we know what the board. Let me see if I'm hearing you right. That if who expressed interest, Mr. Harris and Mr. Lee. So Ms. Haynes not interested. So how you going to determine between those two is
No, if
I got a quarter here.
if he no, if he has interest
Yeah.
and can do it, I'm all for that. I don't want the opportunity to get a waste. If it all fell through, I would definitely look at it. But if he's got interest and
I'm good either
absolutely,
way. Absolutely.
I guess we could work it that way if Mr. Harris can work it out.
Motion. My instructions is if Mr. Harris can go, then if he can't, Mr. Lee, and then if that doesn't happen, then maybe
Maybe one of your
look at
staff.
Staff.
Correct.
So I guess what I would ask you to do is to do a motion to approve acceptance.
So moved.
Have a motion to accept the delegate grant. Is there a second?
And it be determined, the recipients be determined in the order you just explained.
Is there a second?
second.
Second by Mr. Lee. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Also, again, under new business, just a reminder, next month is election of officers and as a desire to serve. Need to make sure that you express those concerns in the board meeting, giving.
I can't remember if it was the last board meeting. Pam had to step out due to family, but I do recall that she had made it known last meeting that she had an interest in the office.
Tanya Haynes, I know we talked about it at the last meeting. After putting much thought to it, I have an interest in serving as board vice president.
And I will reiterate, I'm honored and blessed to be on this board, and if the board would have it, I would love the opportunity to serve as your next president.
Others? All right, very good. Is there any other business that needs to come before this body?
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Harris, second by Mr. Berry. All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Mr. Batson.